Chapter 19 of John is where we're going to be next. John chapter 19. So here we go. Okay, we're going to figure out the sound system eventually, I promise you. We've got a couple of speakers missing still, and he's working on it again this week. We actually don't have all the equipment in yet. You know, this thing about bringing in equipment, we find hopefully you noticed there's actually new signs out in the front on the building. If you didn't notice, when you go out, look up and you'll see them, one on each corner of the buildings there. And it's only taken like 5 or 6 months for those things to finally get in, but that's the way it is right now. If you've noticed equipment and just infrastructure and just things all around, it's like that. Doug has had to beg, borrow, and steal stuff to repair things and get things in order. And so we're working on it. It's happening. And so, okay, calm in the storm. John 19. We're going to actually be in two places this morning. John 19, and then we're going to go over to Matthew, because Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all talk about the cross, and they do it from a slightly different angle, based on what it is that they really want to focus on. John does something in his text that's a little different than the other three, so we'll take a look at that in a moment. But the first thing I want to do is I want to show you just a picture. This is in Coventry, England, and helps turn those little things on. There we go. Coventry, England. This is there's like a 60s, 50s, 60s modern cathedral, Church of England, that's connected to the bombed out building here. They left it bombed out from World War II. And so, I enjoy going to these places that have these historical significance things, and you get a chance to see, wow, okay, there's a famous picture of Winston Churchill kind of standing right about where this picture was taken there, with just rubble everywhere from World War II. So they left the old place there, just kind of a little place you can go and hang out. And then, of course, there's the new modern building connected to it. And the reason I'm showing that to you is because, most people go and they see this. It's Michael the Archangel triumphant over Satan, as we see in the book of Revelation when they do battle, and Michael and his forces, of course, defeat Satan and his forces. So they have a kind of a great picture of that, huge picture there on the outside of the building. But what I want to show you is the thing and I love doing this, just going into these places and you kind of, like, you go to some little side room or in a little place on the side, and you'll see often really nice little things kind of tucked away with little messages. And so in the modern building, tucked there in a little corner along the wall, kind of out of the way, there is this bust of Jesus. And there it is. And down at the bottom below it, it says, "Behold the man, ... Behold the King." And then it has this object. Now, the person who sculpted this or made it, created it, actually a U.S. person, made it out of old war metal pieces from war and cars that had been blown up, and then she put it together and made it into this representation of Jesus as he's about to be crucified. And those words, "Behold the man, behold the King." So it's John 19. So turn on over there. We'll take a chance to look at it. John 19. We've got a little bit of verses here, and then we're going to read it in the book of Matthew, this same story. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time just reading here this morning. Pilate, of course, is going to make those two statements. He's going to make the "behold the man," and he's going to say, "behold the King." And once he makes those two statements, everyone goes crazy, right? Everyone that's involved kind of go mad because this frenzy breaks out. And the Jews do something they have not done their entire history. Matter of fact, they have been fighting against the Romans over this one thing for 100 years. Ever since the Romans marched in, way back in 62 BC, they've been fighting over this one little thing about calling Caesar the king. They have been fighting over, because Caesar, after all, is a god. And so the Jews, of course, are like, we can't do that. We only worship the Father in heaven. And so that has been the trouble spot between the Romans and the Jews forever, it seems like. And here it is now in this text, we get this, where Pilate's going to force the issue. And they end up doing something you would never have thought they would have done. And so, who is your king? What are they going to say to that? We have no king but Caesar. And that's the downfall of the Jews. You can mark it right there. John 19 is the place where the Jews cease to exist as that nation of people. And now we are the Jewish nation because we're the followers of God today. It's right there in John 19 because they just said, we don't follow anybody but Caesar. But how does Pilate do this? So let's read it real quick. It's John chapter 19, starting in verse 5. Jesus therefore came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said to them, behold the man. When therefore the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, crucify, crucify. Pilate said to them, take him yourselves and crucify him. I don't find anything wrong with this guy. The Jews answered him, we have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself out to be the Son of God. When Pilate therefore heard this statement, he was even more afraid. And he entered into the praetorium again and said to Jesus, where are you from? But Jesus gave him no answer. Pilate therefore said to him, you don't speak to me? Do you not know that I have total authority here? I can release you or I can crucify you. I'm it. Verse 11, Jesus answered, you don't have any authority over me unless it's been given to you from above. For this reason, he who delivered me up to you has the greater sin. As a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release him. I mean, can you imagine what's going through Pilate's brain? But the Jews cried out, saying, if you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar. When Pilate therefore heard these words, he brought Jesus out, set him down in the judgment seat, on the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation for the Passover, and it was about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, behold your king. The crowd goes crazy. They end up shouting all the more, we have no king but Caesar. And they've just shouted the words that they would never have shouted for the last 100 years. And on this moment, they do it. Of course, Pilate is all the more astonished, right? And we know the rest of the story. But what an incredible scene. Here is Jesus, and in the center of this storm, I want you to see Jesus here for a moment. I want you to see how calm he is. And so no matter what happens, so now turn over to Matthew. We're going to take the Matthew view of this now. Matthew 26. It's a lengthy reading, but I want you to read it with this in mind. As I read these words, I want you to hear how does he act? How does he react? What is he thinking about? What is he doing as all of these events unfold? And so, and I want you to notice a couple things. Number one, I want you to notice it's a huge storm. I mean, this storm that rages all around him. You've got the crowd, crucify him, crucify him. You've got Pilate, you've got his wife involved. I mean, everybody's here. You got Roman legion there and all the soldiers. You've got the crowd, you got the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the rest of the Sanhedrin that are shouting out things. You've got the chief priest. You've got the apostles that have scattered. You've got Peter doing the denial thing. You've got the whole story of Judas having the pieces of silver and then turning around and going, he shouldn't have done that. And of course, throwing the silver at them, and then he, of course, going and hanging himself. You got all of that taking place. So all of this is all buzzing around. And in the midst of all of that, who is the only one that stays calm in the midst of the storm? Jesus Christ. I mean, in the midst of all of this stuff, everybody else, they don't know what to do. It's like upsetting everyone, from the wife of Pilate to Pilate himself. Everyone's upset. And of course, the crowd. And so, how does Jesus do that? How does Jesus react? What does he go through in this process? Because whatever it is, that character trait, that's what I want. I want to imitate that. And so, I guess you really could say, as we look at this text now, and I've got it listed here on the board, who is actually on trial? Notice the text. If you read closely, it's like, wow, Jesus isn't on trial here. Nowhere is he really thinking, I'm the one on trial. Jesus is like, I'm not on trial here. You're the people on trial. Matter of fact, when he's dying on the cross, remember the words that he said? Father, they don't know what they're doing. Don't hold this against them. It's like, wow, somebody else is on trial, and it's not Jesus Christ. I mean, we know Jesus Christ is perfect. How could he be on trial? It's like, at all times, in all of this, just listen to his control. That's what I'm wanting us to see. So here's this, in the midst of this huge thing that's unfolded, this terrific storm that is all around. Let's just read the text now. Matthew 26, starting in verse 47. While he was still speaking, so we've made it through the Lord's Supper being instituted. We've made it to the Garden of Gethsemane, and now we're going to hear Matthew's particular unique writing of this scene, and it's very detailed, of course. So while he was still speaking, behold, Judas, one of the 12, came up accompanied by a great multitude with swords and clubs from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now he who was betraying him gave them a sign, saying, whomever I shall kiss, he is the one, seize him. And immediately he went to Jesus and said, Hail, Rabbi, and kissed him. Jesus said to him, Friend, do what you have come for. Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and seized them. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus reached and drew out his sword and struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear. Then Jesus said, Put your sword back into its place, for all those who take up the sword shall perish by the sword. Do you not know? Do you not think that I could right now call more than 12 legions of angels who are at my disposal? How then shall the scriptures be fulfilled, that it must happen this way? Verse 55, at that time Jesus said to the multitudes, Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as against a robber? Every day I used to sit at the temple, and I would teach, and you did not seize me. Verse 56, but all of this has taken place that the scriptures of the prophets may be fulfilled. Then all the disciples left him, scattered, and fled. Now let's go to chapter 27, verse 1. Morning had come. All the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. They bound him. They led him away, delivered him up to Pilate the governor. Then when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that he had been condemned, he felt remorse, returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. But they said, What's that to us? See to that yourself. He threw the pieces of silver into the sanctuary, and he fled. And he went away and hanged himself. And the chief priest took the pieces of silver and said, It is not lawful to put them into the temple treasury, since it is the price of blood. So they counseled together, and with the money bought the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. For this reason, the field has been called the field of blood to this day. Now then, that which was spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled, saying, And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of the one whose price had been set by the sons of Israel. Verse 10, they gave them for the potter's field as the Lord directed me. Verse 11, Jesus stood before the governor. The governor questions him, Are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus said, It is as you say. And while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he made no answer. Then Pilate said, Do you not hear how many things they testify against you? And he did not answer. Not even to a single charge, to the point that even the governor was quite amazed. At the feast, The governor was accustomed to release for the multitude any one prisoner whom they wanted. So they were holding at the time a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. When therefore they were gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Who do you want me to release for you, Barabbas, or this Jesus who is called the Christ?" For he knew that because of envy they had delivered him up. So while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife said to him, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man. For last night I suffered greatly in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the multitudes to ask for Barabbas and to put Jesus to death. But the governor answered and said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" And they all said, "Let him be crucified." And he said, "Why? Why should we crucify him? What evil has he done?" But they kept shouting all the more, saying, "Let him be crucified." And when Pilate saw that he was accomplishing nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning to start up, he took water, washed his hands in front of the entire multitude, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to that yourselves." And all the people answered and said, "His blood be on our heads and on our children's heads." Then he released Barabbas for them, but after having Jesus whipped, he delivered him up. That's our text. Lots of things going on there, of course. This terrific storm that unfolds. I've got a couple of lessons for you. Obviously, we've got all kinds of prophets of the Old Testament, right? Isaiah 53 comes to mind, verse 7, that like a lamb being led to the slaughter, like a sheep that before it shears is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. And so you hear that resonate in the background. I like to think of it as Jesus is incredibly calm, collective, he's cool, right? It's like, it's almost like this is the moment when Jesus is most in control, is during his death here before Pilate. It's like every time something happens, Jesus is the one saying, "We're in control here. This is all good. Put that away. Don't do that. Do what you need to do. I don't have to answer that." Over and over. And so I start thinking about, wait a minute, what is Jesus trying to say to us here? And I like the little words that he used over and over. That even in the midst of all of this terrible atrocity that they're about to do to a human being who's not guilty, he doesn't show any kind of resentment. Instead, in spite of the fact that it's a terrible injustice, Jesus does the opposite of the way I tend to react. And so I'm learning, oh, wait a minute, I've got to change the way I think, because I don't think like this. When I see a terrible, glaring, intolerable injustice, how do I tend to react? It's like, that's not fair, that's not right. And the Jewish as well as the Roman law has been twisted completely to ensure that Jesus is guilty. And nobody involved is pretending that this is any kind of a just thing, right? Pilate, of course, is like, okay, if you guys want to crucify him, okay, I'll go ahead and do it. It doesn't make sense to me, and it shouldn't be done. And his wife's over there pleading, he's a righteous guy, don't do it. And he's like, nope, I'm not even going to think about it. And he does it. And you've got the leaders, of course, doing all their thing with the crowd and everything. And so in the midst of all of that, Jesus, of course, says nothing. He accepts it all. Or he'll say those words over and over. He'll say, verse 56 of chapter 26, "All of this has taken place that the scriptures of the prophets may be fulfilled." I get it. We're reading Matthew. Matthew has the Jewish slant. It's the one that's going to write from the Old Testament. And yeah, there's 330 prophecies at least that say that he's coming, the Messiah is coming, and here's what he's going to be like. But I don't think Jesus is using it like that. I mean, I've preached it like that, and I think it's true. I mean, obviously it's true that he's fulfilling prophets and what they had to say. And I know that's important, and I know that's a part of helping the Jews see that Jesus is the rightful Messiah, but they're going to crucify him anyway. I think Jesus is doing something else there, though. He's not just saying, this is to fulfill prophecy, and kind of holds his hands there together, right? I don't think he's doing it like that. I think he's actually saying, just who do you think's in control here? Like, who do you think's making all this happen? It's like there was long ago a script written for this day, and it's happening just like I said it would. Can you hear that control in that? That this is the way it works. This is what happens. I'm the Son of God, and I must die on this cross, and this is what God's desire is. And so I see him finding great comfort in that, like the control that's involved there. Put away your sword. And he explains for a moment, I could call 6,000, I can call these legions, right? I could call thousands and millions of angels if I wanted to, but I don't have to, because that's not what we're going to do here. So let's do what we're going to do. He just goes through all of that. It's like this like supreme example of serenity in the midst of the storm. I think this is probably the most extreme part of this whole ordeal. Is nowhere in all of this does Jesus seem to ever be on trial. It's always like Pilate's like amazed. It's like, this is the part where you're supposed to make your defense. And Jesus is like, not going to do it. And then Pilate's like, okay, that's weird. And then he goes on to the next thing, right? It's just Jesus alone is in control of himself. That's the part I want us to see. I'm not talking about even controlling the entire situation. I'm talking about just himself. Their emotions are totally out of control. And in the midst of all of that, from panic to whatever words you want to use, Jesus is like, this is what it is. This is what it's supposed to be like. I am going to remain in control in all of this. So here's our lessons for us this morning. What I think we could get out of this. Lots of things, of course, and maybe in your mind you've already come up with a whole bunch. I'm going to list a couple, though. Number one, I think we have to be patient. We have to show restraint. Was that the words whenever Jesus was there and he was like, put your sword away? Like, show some restraint. I can just hear Jesus telling him, put the sword away, show some restraint. Don't you know what? This is the plan. We got to go through the plan. And so while they're half crazed with hate, and of course the disciples are thinking, this isn't the right way to take over the Romans, Jesus is like, just be patient. This is the way the plan's supposed to be. And so I hear that for us. How patient are you in the midst of whatever perceived or glaring injustice you have perceived or seen anywhere in the planet? How patient are you? It's like, show some restraint. Could we call down the angels? Could we start praying like that? We really could. And or is Jesus saying, I want those people to repent. Have you thought about praying for their souls? Number two, I think we have to realize who's in control, and we need to be in control, therefore. God is in control. And Jesus says, my Father has mapped this out before there ever was an Adam and Eve. I think he's in control here. So maybe I should be in control of my own self. And I think that's what he's trying to tell the disciples. Control yourselves. Put away the sword. You really shouldn't deny me. You really should stay with me. Understand what's really happening here. And so stay in control. And another way of saying that, of course, is be at peace. We should be a people of peace in the midst of intolerance and whatever things go wrong out there. Are we representing the people that are in control? That we're not going to be like going out and doing strange things. Like the only strange thing we're doing is we're not overreacting, right? Number three. Finally, I think there's this praise God part. We need to rejoice, for God has died for us. All right, let's put that into a text now. 1 Thessalonians 5. You'll see where I got the points this morning, and our lesson is finished. It's 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Hear the text, and our lesson's finished. And I'm gonna, of course, just come along with those same points that we just looked at right here in the text. And so chapter 5 of 1 Thessalonians, I'll pop it up there. There we go, 1 Thessalonians 5. We're going to start in verse 8. He says, but since we are of the day, let us be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, and as a helmet, the hope of salvation. And then he says, verse 9, for God has not destined us for wrath, but for obtaining salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, that whether we are awake or asleep, we may live together with him. So he calls us back to the crucifixion. He says, remember what happened? Remember that Jesus Christ died for you on the cross. So he calls us back to the cross, and he says, this is the way you react because Jesus has died on the cross. So what does he list? He does exactly what we've just seen Jesus do. So now Paul says, here's the way I want you to think. Here's the way you should be in light of the cross. And in light of the fact that you're going to heaven forever, how do you react to the world? And so he tells us, verse 11, therefore encourage one another and build up one another, just as you are also doing. And we request of you, brethren, that you appreciate those who diligently labor among you and have charge over you in the Lord and give you instruction, that you esteem them very highly in love because of their work. So he starts by saying, be patient with your shepherds. He says, so what should we do? We should be patient with our shepherds. Are we not being patient with our shepherds? No, but I'm just saying that's the text. We should continue to be We should continue to be patient with our shepherds, right? It's a part of what we do. So how do we react to a culture or to a group or to a nation or to a world that's following Satan? Well, we look to the example of Jesus. And so Paul here says, do you remember what Jesus was like when he died on the cross for you to bring you salvation? Be patient. What does he say next? Very next words. Live at peace with one another. And so there's this live at peace with your brothers and sisters. And so that makes total sense, doesn't it? It's like in the midst of a crazy world, you and I have got to stay focused, calm. And so we must be at peace with each other. How much do you and I have in common? How much do you have in common with the person sitting next to you right now? Can we fathom how deep that is for just a second? How much that really is in our lives? How much you and I have so much in common? I mean, I think about this daily. It's like, wow. I think about people that have read their Bibles, have seen this text, who understand Jesus has died on the cross. I'll listen, we'll have somebody talking, or one of the little kiddos will be talking. Last week, it was Lucas, and Lucas was trying to tell us about Goliath. He couldn't quite say Goliath. And you're like, I have more in common with Lucas than I do the majority of adults that live in this world. And he's like a little bitty guy. But he's already starting to learn something about Goliath and David, and how David took care of things by the Lord's hand, and how God intervenes in this world. And you think you and I disagree on something, I'm sure. Some of you do. Some of you have not seen the light yet, and you disagree with me on some things, right? And you're like, is that okay? Yeah. Should we be talking about it? No. Should we worry about it? Never. Because we are to live at peace with one another, because Jesus has died on the cross. And if he can be at peace with Pilate, oh yeah, I think we can be at peace with each other also, right? What's the next part of this? He says, well, let's just read it. Verse 14, we urge you, brethren, admonish the unruly, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak. Matter of fact, be patient with all men. Don't repay evil with evil, but always seek after that which is good for one another and for all men. And so I think that's the last point here. We seek good for outsiders, not evil. Well, that's the next to last point. Seek good for those that are outside. You start thinking, how do we approach people who disagree with us? How do you approach someone that disagrees with you? If you had somebody next week come to your house and start, picketing your front yard and saying, we don't like this family. They're not like us for whatever reason. I don't know. I'll pick on the Baxters. You're right in my field of view there. It's like, we don't like the Baxters. They homeschool. I don't know what it would be, but... And so they have like a big sign out front. What's our reaction to that? You know, I think helping them out with a bottle of water, probably, it's going to get hot here pretty soon this summer. Maybe we need to feed them. You guys hungry out there? Is that going to be a different reaction than the world's reaction when those things happen in our lives? Yeah, it is, isn't it? It's like, you know, we may just convince them yet that homeschooling's not a bad gig, right? We have time to bring the water out to you. And so how do we react? We repay evil with good. And so I think that's the lesson of Jesus and his character. Do we have a ways to go with that? Maybe you're there already. But I think that's a difficult lesson to actually rejoice because he is faithful. That's how this text ends. Now may the God of peace himself sanctify you entirely. He's told us rejoice always in verse 16. And then he ends it by saying, now may the God of peace himself sanctify you entirely. May your spirit and soul and body be preserved without blame, because faithful is he who calls you, and he also will bring it to pass. Okay, he's in control. How do I respond to his control? I remain in control of myself. I make sure that I'm reacting well with everyone. Faithful is he who calls you. He's going to remain faithful. We should too. So may the God of peace sanctify all of us to live our lives like this. Is that easy to do? Never, right? It's just not that easy. And so, when you think about world events or things that happen all around us, how are you going to react? Are you going to remain in control? Just like Jesus did. I think that's the lesson of him before Pilate. The incredible amount of what I would be doing versus what Jesus would be doing. I think it would really have been cool to call down the legions of angels and just let them have at it for a few minutes. And then say, just kidding. Now you go ahead and crucify me. I just wanted you to see that I could do it if I want to. And for him to have that kind of restraint, to not even show it, for them to yell out, if you're the king, save yourself. And he's like, I am the king, and I'm not going to do it. The restraint that's involved there. That's amazing. This moment, our worship service is over, and what about your life? Are you showing a restraint? Are you blessing others? Are you calm in the face of whatever is happening? Whatever it might be that's threatening you this week. Finance, your taxes are due in a few weeks, whatever it is, right? Are we being calm under pressure? And this opportunity to pray for one another. We don't want to take it lightly. You have a need, let the elders pray. Let the congregation pray. Don't forget we're in this together. And that's a part of why we have a church, is because I don't know if I could do that. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty positive I would have, like I've said, I would have called down the angels and let them have it for a little while. So I need you to restrain me. And I think that's a part of what a church does. We help restrain one another. We help remind each other that there are moments when each of us are like, you know, I don't think I'm going to be able to remain calm here. It's okay, Edward, remain calm. You can do this. And I'll do the same for you. Let's stand and sing.